Hey guys, welcome to Grad Coach TV, where we demystify and simplify the oftentimes confusing world of academic research. My name's David, and today I'm chatting to one of our trusted dissertation coaches, Ruth, about 7 of the common referencing mistakes that frequently come up in dissertations and reference lists. This discussion is based on one of the many articles over at the Grad Coach blog. So, if you'd like to learn more about referencing, head over to the Grad Coach blog at gradcoach.com/blog. Also, if you're looking for a helping hand in your dissertation, thesis, or research project, check out our one-on-one private coaching service, where we hold your hand throughout the research journey, step by step. For more information and to make a free consultation booking with one of our friendly coaches, head over to gradcoach.com. So Ruth, it's great to have you here. Welcome to the Coachcast.
Thanks, David. It's great to be here again.
So today, you and I are going to be talking about 7 common referencing mistakes. And the first mistake is a big one, is not referencing in the first place. So Ruth, tell me about this.
Absolutely. And so when we reference, when we write, oftentimes we can be in flow. And so we're writing and we're writing and we're writing, and we forget to include references. And one of the biggest issues of not referencing is that your work can be picked up as plagiarism or as academic misconduct. And again, it can be all with the best intention, because you're just trying to get the writing done. But by not including references, it can come across as plagiarism. And so a general rule of thumb is that any statement that you're making about something, so whether it is a fact or whether it's a theory, whether it's another person's proposition, it needs to be referenced. So there are some things that you don't need to reference, like, for example, saying that the Earth goes around the sun. You don't have to reference that. But if you're going to say that such and such a theorist said that, then you need to make sure that you are referencing that person, because that is a fact or a theory from another person.
I think that's a really key point. It's also worth noting that you should make sure that the reference you're citing is the original source. It's very easy to feel like you can cite something that someone else has said about a fact, but you need to go back to the original source. And I really suggest doing this. It's not too difficult. You just follow the chain of citations and you'll get to that original one.
I just wanted to add to that going back to the original source is important, because, as you said, you don't want to be in the situation of broken telephone. And that's one of the main reasons why going back to the source is important, is to make sure that what you're saying the person said is actually what they said.
Yes, definitely. I'll also say my favorite rule in referencing is less is not more. Always be referencing. If you have a paragraph that has only 1 or 2 references, that's suggesting that maybe your arguments are not well supported, or you've missed a reference or 2. So more is more when it comes to referencing. It's easier to take them out than it is to put them in at a later stage.
Exactly, David. And for those of you who are wondering how you do this and save word count, it is advisable, if you're going to make a statement, that you can, in your brackets, you can reference more than one author. So you don't have to have a different paragraph or a different sentence per person's paper. You can, when you're reviewing your literature, you can draw together the thing you're trying to say, and in brackets include 2 or 3 authors or references in brackets. And that shows that your statement is well supported.
I think the only last thing I'd like to add to this is to keep in mind the up-to-dateness of your references. It frequently comes up where a paper that I'm supporting a client with has references from 5 or 10 years ago. We really want to show in any research we're doing, to the greatest degree that is possible, that we have references within the last 3 to 5 years to show that that data and the ideas are still relevant.
I just want to add to that, because you're completely correct, that the only time that there's a caveat to that is when you're referencing that original source that we mentioned. So if, for example, you're referencing a behaviorist theory, so you'll reference Skinner and his original work, but you want to show that this theory still holds today. In your brackets, you will then reference Skinner, but then, as you've said, you will include the reference from the last 3 to 5 years, which demonstrates that what was stated then is still the case now.
So, mistake number 2 is inserting citations after the fact, instead of building your references from day one. This is really important during your research journey. And Ruth can maybe give us a little bit of detail on why it's so important.
Linking to the first point, this is really important because you want to make sure that you are accurately citing and you are including everything as you are writing. So as I mentioned, it's easy to get into flow and forget to cite. Or what I often see with papers is someone will make a statement and in brackets they'll write ref because they know they need to reference it, but then they forget to come back, or they come back and now they cannot for the life of them remember which source this was that they were referring to. And so even if you do decide to use some kind of shorthand way of referring to an article and not the full proper in-text reference, make sure that you are crediting your sources as you write and coming back then, if you do that, to make sure that they are accurate and correct.
A great way to manage this is to set up a literature catalog. And there's a range of ways that you can do this. And the point of a research catalog is a place where you can take notes on papers, you can summarize the findings, and you can point out key aspects or quotes even that might be useful. And so there's a range of ways that you can set these up. One that's quite favorable by me is to use an Excel document. It's searchable, it's filterable, and it is quite robust. And so I like to set up a literature catalog as I read a paper. I input the title, I input the main findings, and a range of other topics, including some searchable terms. I also want to say we do have a template on the Grad Coach website of a catalog that you can use as a base to build from. And they're just really helpful when it comes down to finding a reference to support that idea that you know you've read about. You don't know where you got it from.
And I just want to add, because that is a very great point, is that the nice thing with using a document like Excel and even our template that you can download is it's customizable. And so if you were doing research, for example, on international relations, you might find it very important to have a column or to have a filter on country. However, if you're doing research that is very specific to a certain area or a specific field or a specific methodology, you might find it more necessary to have other filters. And so the beauty of customizing it is that when you come back or when you want to check for certain sources, you can filter through your articles based on the topic that you're looking for.
So our third mistake is not using a reference management software. And I will say it's not really a mistake, but it's really why are you not using a reference management software? Ruth, maybe you can tell us about how the software has changed the academic research world.
When you say why you're not using it, the first thing that comes to mind is why would you do it to yourself to have to manually reference? If I think back to my master's, I manually reference everything because I didn't trust the technology. And I look back and I think how much time I could have saved using reference software. And so it's important to know that many of these sources of software are free. So like Mendeley, Zotero, EndNote, RefWorks, they're all free. And they are really great because you will drag and drop your articles into these programs and it populates the fields for you. So you have this wonderfully formatted citation in text and in the reference list, and it does all the work for you. It's also really helpful because when you are writing, you don't have to manually cite. You can search your database and it will include the citation for you as well as the reference list. So you still have to check the references, which we'll get into on the next point, but it's really helpful that you don't have to worry about checking the spelling of, especially a foreign author's surname, or checking that you've got the year correct. It saves a lot of time.
I totally agree. And I also, in my honors year, did it by hand and left so many mistakes in my reference list. And so it really does help. And what I can also say is, in terms of if you're really interested in this, but the software is feeling a little difficult, there are a bunch of guides out there on the internet, but you're on our YouTube channel. So maybe head over to our earlier video on Mendeley and Zotero and how to use those software. It really is quite user-friendly and definitely will make your life so much easier. So the fourth mistake is inputting data incorrectly into your reference management software if you're using it, or into your reference list if you're not. Now, Ruth, why is it important to check your references and making sure that they're inputted correctly?
Well, the first reason is because as much as software is really helpful, it's not perfect. Sometimes the wrong data is pulled. Sometimes the way the article is structured is in such a way that the reference manager can't pull the information it needs. So it's important to check, but it's also mainly important to check because you need to be accurate in your referencing. Remember, the goal of referencing is that the person who's reading your paper can come back and look at your references and possibly go and access those references themselves if they need. So if your referencing is incorrect, firstly, it'll be difficult to cross-check with your reference list. And I see this quite often where if you're doing it manually or if you don't check correctly, in text, for example, you might write 2018 as the year, and in your reference list, it's 2016. And then the person reading the paper doesn't necessarily know which year is correct and how to go and find the article. So it's just to do with accuracy.
That's really a key point. And one of the nice advantages of reference management software and the sort of increase of the digital era is we can actually take advantage of DOIs. And there are specific document identifying numbers that all references, journal articles have. And you can actually input that into the reference manager. It can check the database and correct any of those mistakes.
Absolutely.
The one thing to keep an eye out for, though, is there are predatory journals out there that take advantage of this and use DOIs of actual papers instead of the predatory paper. So always make sure to check that the paper that's being cited is the same one that you're reading.
Also linking to that is citing non-traditional sources. So when you write an academic paper, the likelihood is that you're going to be primarily relying on journal articles or books. And so there are instances where you need to use sources that do not fall into either of these categories. And so when you're using your software, you need to first tell the software that this isn't a journal or a book. And then you also need to check with your own reference style guide if you're not sure that you are inputting the details correctly, so that once again, when it outputs the reference for you, it's done so accurately.
I think that's important because especially in more practical work, often enough there might be practitioner reports. You might be looking at something like a government gazette, a website even, or software that you're citing. So just making sure that that data is correctly categorized in your reference manager, making that check. You only have to do it once, but not doing it is likely to cause more trouble than it is. So mistake number 5 in the reference list is not using the correct version of a referencing system. And this comes up quite often because there are a range of referencing systems out there. Ruth, I know this is something that really gets your blood boiling, so tell me about it.
So I come from a background where we use APA, and if you're watching this video and you use APA, I'm pretty sure you're groaning a bit inside because it is a very big document and there's a lot of things to check. But it's very helpful. And so you might be aware that APA recently moved to APA 7. And so you need to make sure that you're using APA 7 and not APA 6, because there are some pretty key differences that will affect the way you reference. Additionally to that is Harvard. Now, Harvard is the one that I get frustrated about sometimes, simply because it's a brilliant system, but it differs from university to university. And so if you're using Harvard, you really need to check with your university what version you need to be using and what guidelines they set out for you. Because once again, as we mentioned in point 1, incorrect referencing can lead you to being flagged for plagiarism. And so it's really important that you use the correct version so that you're referencing correctly, so that you don't accidentally write something that is misconstrued as academic misconduct.
I think it's dangerous for me to say, but I'm on Team Harvard here. So what I would suggest, and this goes even further into your research journey, if you're looking to be a researcher, each journal has their own referencing style. So it's really important, wherever possible, go check that guidelines document, make that second check and potentially even a third check, because nothing upsets an editor or a marker more than incorrect referencing. It's something they see so much of that they can't not see it.
I'm glad you mentioned the editor part, because that's another thing I was going to say, that if you do send your document for editing, it's really important that the editor knows which version you're using, so they don't go and undo all the hard work you've put in if your university has got specific requirements for certain things. So the editors follow a style guide to a T. So if you know which version and you have a particular guide for that version, the editor can then assist and make sure that you've used it correctly.
So, mistake number 6 is not referencing direct quotes properly. This is something that gets me a little upset, so Ruth, take it over.
Likewise, David, referencing direct quotes is really important, but also we first need to start by discussing the use of direct quotes. So oftentimes when you're working through articles and it's late at night, it gets easier to simply copy some information from the article and reference it appropriately. But the issue with doing that too much is that it can come across as though you didn't spend enough time reading and understanding the content to make it your own. So in general, you don't use a direct quote to make a claim, you use it to substantiate a claim. So it's really important that you're not overusing direct quotes. If there's absolutely no other way to use it, or if you're defining something, it is possible to use it, but try and avoid it as far as possible. And then on that, because you are copying directly from a source, if you don't reference correctly, it's very likely that your paper or that content will be picked up as having been plagiarized. So again, go back and check your style guide on what's required of you for that. But it's really important that your direct quotes have everything needed. For example, in APA, I know that if you do a direct quote, you need to include the page number, whereas you don't include the page number otherwise. So that's just the one kind of thing that you have to make sure you include.
It's also worth noting that we've been discussing quoting in terms of quoting sources and the literature, rather than quoting information from your data collection. For instance, if you're quoting from your participants, there is a lot more detail and different systems to follow. Often enough, we would need to say which participant said it, participant A, which line number in the transcript it came from, and providing enough detail there. When we're quoting from the literature, there's also all those different steps to keep in mind in terms of, do you need to include the page number? Do you need to include the chapter, etc.? And so really just do keep that in mind. So our last mistake number 7, is not doing a final check of your reference. Ruth, how can we do this?
So when you finish your document and right before you hand it in, check, double check, triple check everything in your document, but particularly the references because of how important it is. So sometimes when you're working chapter by chapter, sometimes people will create own unique reference lists for that chapter. If you do that and you combine the reference lists, make sure that you are checking for duplicates and removing them where necessary in this process. Secondly, and very importantly, is to remember to cross-check your in-text references with your reference list. So anything you reference in text has to appear in the reference list and vice versa, especially if you're writing in a hurry. On our first point, where sometimes people forget to cite, if you're writing in a hurry and you leave a bracket open for an in-text reference, but you know you read the source, it can be very easy to put it in the reference list, but then forget to go back and put it in text. So cross-check using your word processing programs. You can use certain shortcuts that you can find and search for certain words. And I find that's very helpful to see if it appears in text and the reference list.
I think it's also worth noting that you need to make sure that there's no cases where you might have 2 different dates for the same paper, because if you're using a reference manager, that can cause problems. So try to keep an eye out for that. It's also worth making the distinction between a bibliography and a reference list. A bibliography is everything you have read on a topic, and a reference list is all the sources you've cited in your work. Now, most of the time, we're going to be presenting reference lists, and so it's important to keep that in mind. And the other thing to keep in mind is don't necessarily cite sources that aren't relevant. For instance, it's not worth citing your study guide as to why you're doing a study. It's really not necessary. And so just keep an eye for that. And we really just want to ensure we're doing a final check to make sure we're not missing anything.
Yeah, and I just want to pick up on that with using the study guide. The study guide is given to you, and it's usually or always a good source of information. But the study guide, as you remember, we said information comes from somewhere. The content in there comes from somewhere, and using a study guide as a reference, again, it makes it look as though you didn't bother to read further beyond it. And again, you can reference it with all the good intention, but it doesn't give the impression, I think, that one would necessarily hope it does. So cross-checking is really important. And as you said, just doing final reference list checks will save you a lot of time down the line, because if you get your document back, you're going to have to fix it anyway.
All right, so that's a wrap on today's episode of Grad Coach TV. Remember, for more information on referencing, head over to the Grad Coach blog at gradcoach.com/blog. There you can also get access to our free dissertation and thesis writing mini course, which will give you all the information you need to get started on your research journey. Also, if you're looking for a helping hand with your thesis or dissertation, check out our one-on-one private coaching service, where you can work with one of our friendly coaches, just like Rue. For all the information and to book a free consultation, head over to gradcoach.com. So, that's it for today. Until next time, good luck.